Common sense ain't that common anymore. Seems common sense is past tense, just like the dinosaur. Political correctness has got a lot to answer for, 'cause common sense ain't that common anymore.
Now on weekends, the Treasury of Common Sense.
Yes, Leith Van Onselen, macrobusiness.com.au. It's where I get my financial news and analysis every day. It's a ripper, and I know you love Leith, and he doesn't mind doing this, so thankfully we get to do it every week. He's on the line. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thanks, Luke. How about yourself?
Very well indeed. I was watching someone in politics have a thing or two to say through the week. I don't want to give this person up just yet. And I'm there thinking to myself, I don't know who Leith has in mind this week, but I reckon if it's not this bloke, I'll be surprised. Anyway, we'll get to that in a moment or two. We do want to start talking about Australia's superannuation savings, and you refer to an excellent article by the wonderful Judith Sloan in the Oz this week.
Yeah, that's right. So Judith Sloan, she published a great article basically explaining how Sweden's pension system has lost 18.5 billion euros after investing in failed renewable energy projects, which is basically at the behest of the government. So the government encouraged their pension funds, like their superannuation system, private savings, to invest in all these renewable projects. And, you know, to back its, quote, green industrial revolution. And as a result, Sweden's pension funds obviously shifted heavily into these climate-aligned projects rather than just the traditional diversified financial assets, which, you know, obviously superannuation funds, pension funds usually invest in. And these renewable mega projects ended up being total financial sinkholes. And as a result, they obviously resulted in massive losses, which has been borne by these investors. Now, the reason why Judith Sloan referred to Sweden, and I am too, is that there's clear lessons here for Australia. Because it's basically what's happened in Sweden is a cautionary tale about what could happen to Australia's retirement savings if the government tries to encourage our super funds to invest in these high-risk, decarbonisation projects that have poor fundamentals. Now, so Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Finance Minister Katie Gallagher last year declared that the Future Fund, which is supposed to support the pensions of federal employees, so the Future Fund was basically the proceeds from the sale of Telstra back in the 90s. The federal government set up a sovereign wealth fund, and it's basically designed to invest, earn return, and then pay the pensions of federal employees when they retire. And Chalmers and Gallagher basically directed the Future Fund to invest in social projects and clean energy transition, quote, where possible. And this move reinforced sort of Chalmers' belief in what he calls value-based capitalism, which is basically whereby both public and private resources will be spent on social goals like renewable energy. And the new head of the Future Fund, he's been ahead for a year or so, former Labor Minister Greg Combet has also said that he wants to invest more in renewable energy projects. Now, last month, Jeff Chambers at The Australian reported that Treasurer Chalmers also wants to direct some of Australia's superannuation savings into Labor's pet policy areas like renewable energy. Now, Paul Schroeder, who's the head of the nation's largest superannuation fund, Australian Super, he basically described the notion of the government telling super funds where to invest as a, quote, utter disaster. Now, I 100% align with Schroeder's view. Australia's super savings, it's our money, and super funds should act in the best financial interests of us.
Don't they, mate? Aren't they contractually, as a trustee of a super fund, they have to do that? That's their first objective, if you will. Isn't that what they're there to invest in the interests of members?
Yeah, that's right. But according to Jeff Chambers, the Australian, when he made this report, and this the government's looking to somehow have them invest in our best interests.
Oh, wow.
But also invest in their pet policy areas like, renewable energy.
Yeah.
And, my view, and I'm sure this is the view of just about everyone listening, is that our superannuation savings, they belong to us. They should not be used as a slush fund to try and satisfy political agendas or social things like renewable energy or, basically the government's pet projects, right? the superannuation funds should be there solely to maximise the financial returns for us so that we can have a dignified retirement. We could have maximum money in our retirements. And, it's bad enough that the federal government wants to waste billions of taxpayer dollars into these boondoggle energy projects, which it is. It's wasting, countless billions of dollars on this stuff, which we're ultimately paying for. But then to want to direct Australia's superannuation savings to also into these areas is an absolute recipe for disaster. And Judith Sloan made the excellent point that what's happening in Sweden is a cautionary tale for Australia because, again, their government directed their pension funds to invest in these areas, and as a result, they've lost $18.5 billion.
Wow!
Which now means that Swedish retirees have less money, and it was because the government wanted to support its quote green industrial revolution. Now, Australia just needs to avoid this at all costs. Our government needs to basically back off, let super funds do what they're supposed to do, which is invest in assets that provide the maximum risk-adjusted return. To give us a dignified retirement. It's our money. It's not the government's money to be used as a plaything.
Yeah, 100%. All right, this. What have you settled on this week, mate?
This bloke's been clown of the week a few times. It's Treasurer Jim Chalmers. Now, Treasurer Jim Chalmers, he just doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. So this week, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released its September quarter wage data. And what it showed is that real inflation-adjusted wages, that's your wages once you adjust for inflation, they actually fell by 0.5% over the quarter. And real wages are now tracking where they were in mid-2011, about 6% below their peak. And instead of keeping his mouth shut, Treasurer Jim Chalmers, he posted on Twitter and also issued a media release boasting that Labor has, quote, delivered the longest period of consecutive real wage growth in almost a decade.
Now, let me stop you there because I heard him say that in a media event, and then I saw the release in my inbox, and I'm thinking to myself, hang on, is that actually right? So back to you.
He's been very sneaky. So what he basically said is that he's delivered 8 consecutive quarters of annual real wage growth. So what that means is if you compare the September quarter of this year versus the September quarter of last year, we've had like a tiniest little slither of growth. And so he's been very selective. But the fact of the matter is that real wages are tracking where they were in mid-2011. They're down about nearly 6.5% from their peak. This is not something you want to boast about. And it's even worse. It's even worse than the headline figures suggest, Luke, because the strongest recent wage growth has actually come from the public sector. So public sector wages rose by 3.8% over the year, whereas private sector wages rose by only 3.2%. Wages also growing significantly faster in government-funded sectors. So these aren't necessarily public service. These are like healthcare and social assistance, etc., which are basically funded by the government, but they can be in the private sector.
Yeah.
Like if you think of a private sector national disability and service, provider.
Yep.
The wages are growing fastest there, but in the non-market, i.e. the traditional private sector, they're growing significantly slower. And finally, Labor's also artificially lowered the inflation via its $5.3 billion of energy bill subsidy relief. So the fact of the matter is, without those subsidies, which is paid for by us, retail electricity prices would have been 16% higher since mid-2003, which means that headline inflation would have been higher and also means real wages would have been lower. So the government's basically duped the stats. And here's the thing, Luke, the Reserve Bank of Australia's latest statement of monetary policy forecasts that basically by the end of 2027, Australian real wages are still going to be tracking where they were at the end of 2011, still 5.8% below their peak. So I don't know what Jim Chalmers is boasting about. And it even gets worse. Just one last thing. He also boasted that 4 out of every 5 jobs since Labor was elected were in the private sector. Well, that's very loose with the truth, because 4 out of 5 jobs, or nearly 4 out of 5 jobs, 78%, since the first quarter of 2023, have actually been in government-funded sector. So again, this is where he's been loose with the truth, because most of the jobs have been related to the NDIS. The NDIS is government-funded, but often a lot of that money goes to a private sector NDIS provider.
Yeah.
So he's counting that as private sector when it's really government-funded sector. So,
wow.
So he's just been very loose with the truth. Like, technically on these statements, he can be correct if you, but it's misleading. It's highly misleading.
Yes. So if you're spending billions on the NDIS and you pay some of that funding to a recipient who then pays that money to a private sector care organisation, he can claim, well, that's money into the private sector, but it would not get there were it not for direct government funding. So that's the con, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the economy is split up into basically the non-market sector, which is your public service, traditional public service, like your bureaucrats, that sort of thing. The education and healthcare and social assistance, because those are sort of government funded. But the market sector, which is your traditional private sector, is everything else. And the fact of the matter is, nearly, basically 2/3 of the jobs since the pandemic and nearly 80% the last several years of jobs growth has all been in that non-market sector, which is basically government funded. And the traditional private sector, your market sector, has experienced incredibly poor job growth, incredibly poor wage growth, and yet Jim Chalmers is boasting that he's created 4 out of every 5 jobs has been in the private sector, which is very loose with the truth. It's misleading, basically.
Yeah, of course. Righto, mate. Thanks a lot. macrobusiness.com.au. Talk to you next week.
No worries, Luke.
Thank you, Leith Van Onselen.